The first thing I noticed when I woke up that Wednesday morning in January was how cold my house felt. And the second thing I noticed was the bright orange envelope taped to my front door like a scarlet letter. I'm Quincy Morrison, and I've lived in Pinebrook Commons, a small planned community outside Portland, Oregon, for 3 years now. The house was perfect when I bought it, a modest 2-story with decent bones and a yard big enough for my golden retriever, Max. What wasn't perfect was the homeowners association, but I figured I could handle some minor annoyances about lawn height and paint colors. Boy, was I wrong. That morning, I peeled the envelope off my door and tore it open while standing in my boxers and slippers on the frozen welcome mat. My breath came out in visible puffs. The letter inside was typed in that aggressively corporate font HOAs love to use. Violation notice. The Pinebrook Commons HOA board has observed excessive furnace usage at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. Per Section 14.3 of the Community Guidelines regarding environmental responsibility and energy conservation, residents are expected to maintain reasonable heating practices. Your furnace has been running continuously for 72 hours, which violates our green living standards. Fine, $500. Continued violation will result in additional penalties. I read it 3 times, each time getting angrier. They were fining me for heating my own house in January in Oregon. I pulled on jeans and a heavy sweater, then walked straight to my thermostat. 62 degrees. The furnace was struggling to even maintain that because this particular week had brought a cold snap that dropped nighttime temperatures into the teens. I wasn't running my heat excessively, I was trying not to freeze. Max trotted over and nudged my hand with his wet nose. "Can you believe this, buddy?" I asked him, waving the letter. He cocked his head like he understood my frustration. I called the HOA office immediately. The phone rang 6 times before someone picked up. "Pinebrook Commons Homeowners Association, this is Brenda speaking. How may I help you?" The voice was sickeningly sweet. "Yes, this is Quincy Morrison at 2847 Maple Ridge. I just got a violation notice about my furnace and I need to talk to someone about this immediately." "Oh, Mr. Morrison, let me pull up your file," I heard clicking on a keyboard. "Yes, I see the notice here. Would you like to schedule a hearing with the board?" "A hearing? I want this fine removed. You can't charge people for heating their homes in winter." "Sir, the environmental guidelines were voted on and approved by the community 2 years ago. We're committed to reducing our carbon footprint." "My pipes are going to freeze if I turn my heat down any lower," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "This is insane. I can note your complaint, but the fine stands until you attend a board meeting. The next one is scheduled for February 15th. That's over a month away." "Board meetings are held monthly, Mr. Morrison. Would you like me to add you to the agenda?" I hung up without answering. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. The next few days were tense. I kept my furnace running because I'm not an idiot, and I wasn't about to risk burst pipes or hypothermia to satisfy some bureaucratic nonsense. Another orange envelope appeared on my door 3 days later. Another $500. Then another one the day after that. I was up to $1,500 in fines for the crime of not wanting to die of exposure in my own home. On Sunday, I decided to drive over to the HOA Community Center. The Pinebrook Commons Community Center was the crown jewel of our neighborhood, a sprawling building with a gym, pool, meeting rooms, and a full commercial kitchen. The board held their meetings there, and it served as the headquarters for all HOA operations. The parking lot was empty when I arrived at noon. I tried the front doors, but they were locked. Through the windows, I could see lights on inside, which meant someone was there. I knocked hard on the glass. A woman appeared from a side hallway. She was maybe 55, with highlighted blonde hair cut into an aggressive bob and wearing a cream-colored pantsuit. She pointed at her watch and mouthed, "Closed," at me. I knocked again, harder. She walked over and cracked the door open about 6 inches. "We're closed on Sundays. Office hours are posted on the website." "I need to talk to someone about these fines," I said, holding up the stack of orange envelopes. "Are you Quincy Morrison?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Yes. I'm Patricia Hastings, HOA president. Your fines are valid, Mr. Morrison. You were warned in the guidelines that we take environmental violations seriously." "You're charging me for heating my house," I said slowly, like I was explaining something to a child. "That's not an environmental violation, that's basic survival." "Our community has standards," Patricia said. Her voice had that condescending tone that certain middle-aged women perfect over decades of practice. "We all agreed to sacrifice for the greater good. Just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean you get to damage our planet. My thermostat is set to 62 degrees. That's excessive for this community. We recommend 60 during the day, 55 at night. Patricia, that's dangerous. The CDC recommends keeping homes above 68 for health reasons." "The CDC doesn't pay our community utility bills," she snapped. "The board voted. The decision stands. You can appeal at the February meeting, but until then, the fines continue to accrue. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She shut the door in my face. I stood there in the parking lot for a long moment, watching my breath fog in the freezing air. Through the window, I could see Patricia walk back down the hallway, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The community center looked warm and comfortable. I could see the thermostat on the wall near the entrance from where I stood. It read 74 degrees. They were keeping their precious community center at 74 while fining residents for heating above 60. Something in my head just snapped. I drove home in a fury, barely seeing the road. Max greeted me at the door like always, his tail wagging with unconditional dog love that made me feel slightly better. I spent the rest of Sunday researching. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, the county codes, everything I could find about utility regulations and homeowner rights. Legally, they were in a gray area. HOAs in Oregon have broad authority to enforce community standards, but there's nothing in state law that explicitly addresses heating restrictions. I could lawyer up and probably win eventually, but that would take months and thousands of dollars I didn't have. Monday brought another orange envelope. $2,000 now. I called my buddy Jake, who I'd known since college. He worked in construction and knew more about building systems than anyone I'd ever met. "They're doing what?" he asked when I explained the situation. "Fining me for running my furnace multiple times. It's up to $2,000 now." "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. I'm just so angry, man." They've got the community center cranked up to 74 while they're threatening residents about heating. "Wait, the community center, that big place with the pool?" "Yeah. That building must cost a fortune to heat, especially with a pool. Those things are energy vampires." The hypocrisy is unreal. We talked for another 20 minutes, mostly just me venting. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the stack of violation notices. Max put his head on my knee and I scratched behind his ears absently. The community center. The massive, wasteful community center that probably burned through more natural gas in a week than my house used in a month. I'm not proud of what I thought next. I'm really not. But in that moment, sitting in my cold house with $2,000 in fines for the crime of not wanting to freeze, something dark took root in my mind. If they wanted to play games about gas usage, Maybe I could show them what actual gas problems looked like. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to my job at the accounting firm downtown. I didn't actually plan to do anything illegal that day, I just needed time to think. But the more I thought, the angrier I got, and anger has a way of burning through common sense like acid through paper. I drove past the community center 3 times that day, just observing. There were cars in the parking lot during business hours, the office staff, probably Patricia herself. The building closed at 7 p.m. on weeknights. It would be empty after that. I'm not a criminal. I'd never even gotten a speeding ticket, but I'd also never been pushed this far by institutional nonsense that pretended to be authority. Wednesday, another fine. $2,500 total. Thursday, I made a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. I waited until well after midnight, around 2 a.m. on Friday morning. I dressed in dark clothes, jeans, a black jacket, a dark beanie. I felt ridiculous, like a kid playing spy, but I didn't want to be identified if there were cameras. The community center sat dark and silent when I pulled into the far corner of the parking lot, my headlights off. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was insane. This was criminal. I could turn around right now, go home, deal with this legally like a rational adult. But I didn't. I grabbed the small toolbox from my trunk and walked toward the building, sticking to the shadows. I'd spent the previous day researching gas systems online, watching YouTube videos about gas lines and shut-off valves. Dangerous knowledge in the hands of an angry person. The gas meter and main line were on the south side of the building, tucked behind some landscaping. There was a streetlight about 30 yards away, but it cast enough shadow that I could work without being directly visible. My hands shook as I knelt down next to the meter. The gas line ran from the meter into the building through a sturdy pipe. The shut-off valve was clearly marked a simple quarter-turn valve that would cut all gas to the building. I could just turn that off and walk away. They'd figure it out eventually, turn it back on, and that would be that. A minor inconvenience at best. But that wouldn't be enough. That wouldn't make them understand. My hands moved before my brain could stop them. I had a pipe wrench in my toolbox. I positioned it on the line just after the meter, where the pipe curved toward the building foundation. The metal was cold under my gloved fingers. This is wrong, a voice in my head whispered. This is dangerous. This is a felony. I thought about Patricia's face when she shut the door on me. I thought about the 74-degree thermostat while they fined me for 62. I thought about Max shivering in the house because I was scared to run the heat. I wrenched the pipe hard to the right. Nothing happened at first. I adjusted my grip and pulled harder, putting my weight into it. Metal groaned. Then I heard it, a small crack, barely audible, then a hiss. The smell hit me immediately. Natural gas, that distinctive rotten egg odor they add for safety. I'd cracked the pipe. Gas was leaking out, not a huge amount but steady. Panic flooded through me. What had I done? This wasn't just property damage, this was dangerous. This could cause an explosion. People could die. I grabbed the wrench and tried to bend the pipe back, but it was too late. The crack had spiderwebbed around the metal. The hiss was getting louder. I ran. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. What had I done? What the hell had I done? I'd let anger override every bit of common sense and decency I had. I'd committed a serious crime that could hurt innocent people. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the community center exploding, people inside, fire consuming everything. At 6 a.m., I got dressed and drove back toward the community center. There were fire trucks in the parking lot. My stomach dropped into my shoes. Oh God, what happened? I parked down the street and walked closer, trying to look like a concerned neighbor. The building was still standing, no fire, no explosion. Fire crews were walking around outside with detection equipment. A police cruiser sat near the entrance. I felt sick. I turned to leave to go home and confess everything before someone got hurt, but a voice called out, "Excuse me, sir. Do you live in the community?" A police officer was walking toward me. He looked young, maybe 30, with a neat uniform and a professional demeanor. His nameplate read Officer Stevens. "Yes," I managed. "I'm a resident. What happened?" "Gas leak at the community center. Utility company is on the way to shut it down and fix it. Did you notice anything unusual last night? Anyone hanging around the building?" "No, I was home all night." "You smell like gas," he observed. My mind raced. I was checking my own connections this morning when I smelled it. I thought maybe it was my house, but then I saw the trucks here. He nodded slowly, making notes. "What's your name and address?" I told him. He wrote it down. "We'll probably be canvassing the neighborhood later today. Someone damaged the gas line deliberately." "You see anything suspicious, you call us, okay? Someone did it on purpose." I forced surprise into my voice. "Looks that way. Could have been a lot worse if our night patrol hadn't smelled it during his rounds at 4 a.m. Building could have exploded." The blood drained from my face. "That's terrible." "Yeah. Anyway, community center's going to be closed until they fix everything and air it out. Could be a week or more." I nodded and walked away on unsteady legs. Back in my car, I sat for 5 minutes just breathing, trying not to throw up. I'd nearly caused an explosion. I'd nearly killed people. What had been a stupid, angry impulse could have ended in tragedy. I drove home in a daze. Max greeted me at the door, and I sank down onto the floor and hugged him, burying my face in his fur. "I'm an idiot," I whispered. "I'm such an idiot." The guilt was overwhelming. I'd committed a serious crime, not just vandalism, but something that endangered lives. The gas company would investigate. The police would investigate. There might be cameras I hadn't seen. Someone might have witnessed me. My whole life could be over because I let anger override judgment. I spent Friday in a fog of anxiety. Every car that drove past my house made me jump. Every phone notification made my heart race. I kept expecting police to knock on my door with an arrest warrant, but nothing happened. Saturday morning brought another orange envelope. $3,000. The fine continued despite the community center being closed. I stared at it numbly. None of this seemed real anymore. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered with a shaking hand. "Mr. Morrison, this is Patricia Hastings from the HOA. I'm calling to inform you that despite the temporary closure of our community center, all existing violations and fines remain in effect. We're working with the police to find whoever vandalized our building, and rest assured, they will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "Okay," I said weakly. "Furthermore, the board has voted to increase your fines to $1,000 per day until you comply with heating restrictions. We will place a lien on your property if necessary." "You can't do that." "Read your bylaws, Mr. Morrison. Section 19.7 gives us authority to place liens for unpaid violations. You signed those bylaws when you purchased your home." She hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the walls close in. $1,000 per day. I'd be bankrupt in months. And if they found out I was the one who damaged the community center, I'd be in prison. This had spiraled completely out of control. Sunday, I decided I needed legal help. I called 3 lawyers who specialized in HOA disputes. 2 didn't answer because it was Sunday. The third, a woman named Sarah Chen, picked up. "I'm working weekend hours right now," she explained when I apologized for calling. "Tell me what's going on." I explained everything except the part about the gas line. She listened without interrupting. Okay, this is actually actionable, she said when I finished. Oregon law doesn't allow HOAs to enforce heating restrictions that could endanger health and safety. The problem is, fighting this in court takes time and money. How much money? Retainer would be $3,000. Total costs could run $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how hard they fight. I didn't have that kind of money, especially not with the fines piling up. What if I can't afford that? Then you're kind of stuck. You could try representing yourself, but HOAs have lawyers on retainer. It's not a fair fight. We talked for another few minutes before I thanked her and hung up. I was trapped. I couldn't afford to fight them legally. I couldn't afford to pay the fines, and I'd already committed a felony that could send me to prison if discovered. Monday morning, I went to work and tried to pretend everything was normal. My boss asked if I was feeling better after my sick day. I said yes. A coworker commented that I looked stressed. I blamed it on home repairs. At lunch, I sat in my car and checked the local news on my phone. There was an article about the community center. Investigation continues into Pinebrook Commons vandalism. Portland police continue to investigate the deliberate damage to a gas line at the Pinebrook Commons Community Center early Friday morning. Detective Laura Martinez stated that security footage is being reviewed and residents are being interviewed. This was not an accident, Detective Martinez said. Someone intentionally damaged infrastructure in a way that could have caused loss of life. We're treating this with the utmost seriousness. Security footage. My hands started shaking again. Had there been cameras? I'd looked for them, but I might have missed something. In the dark, in my anger, I might have been caught on video committing a felony. That night, I couldn't eat. I gave Max his dinner and watched him eat enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the nightmare his owner had created. I envied him. At 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and my heart stopped. Detective Martinez, at least, I assumed it was her based on the plain clothes and badge on her belt, stood on my porch with Officer Stevens from Friday. This was it. They knew. Somehow they knew. I opened the door with a face that I'm sure screamed guilt. "Can I help you, Mr. Morrison?" "I'm Detective Martinez. This is Officer Stevens. We're investigating the vandalism at the community center. Can we ask you a few questions?" "Sure," I said, my voice barely working. "Can we come inside?" I stepped aside and let them in. Max came bounding over, tail wagging because he's a terrible guard dog. Officer Stevens bent down to pet him. "Nice dog," he said. "Thanks." We stood in my living room. Detective Martinez had a notepad out. She was probably mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Officer Stevens mentioned he spoke with you on Friday morning near the community center. You said you were home the night before." "Yes, all night." "Anyone who can verify that?" "Just Max here," I said, gesturing to my dog, trying to make a joke. It came out wrong. Detective Martinez didn't smile. "We're talking to all residents, particularly those who have had recent conflicts with the HOA. Officer Stevens' report indicates you told him you had issues with the HOA. Care to elaborate?" She already knew. I could see it in her eyes, but maybe she didn't have proof yet. "They've been fining me for running my furnace," I said carefully. "It's been frustrating." "How frustrating?" "Excuse me. How frustrated are you, Mr. Morrison? Frustrated enough to damage property?" "No, of course not. I'm angry about the fines, but I wouldn't commit a crime over it." "What were you doing Thursday night into Friday morning?" "Sleeping. Like I said, I was home." Security footage from the community center shows a vehicle similar to yours in the parking lot around 2 a.m. Friday morning. My blood turned to ice. "Similar to mine. I drive a pretty common Honda Civic. A blue Honda Civic, same as yours." She let that hang in the air. There are probably dozens of blue Civics in this area, I said, but my voice was shaking. Officer Stevens spoke up from where he was still petting Max. The vehicle in the footage also has a Portland State bumper sticker on the rear window, left side, same as yours. My PSU bumper sticker. I'd forgotten about it. You forget about the things that are on your car every day until they become evidence against you. I want a lawyer, I said quietly. Detective Martinez nodded like she expected that. That's your right. But I'll tell you what we know, Mr. Morrison. We know you've been fined extensively by the HOA. We know you had a confrontation with Patricia Hastings. We know a vehicle matching yours was at the community center at the time of the vandalism. We've got gas on the tools in your trunk. Officer Stevens spotted your toolbox when we walked past your car in the driveway. You searched my car. No search. The trunk was open, plain sight. I hadn't closed my trunk properly. Stupid, stupid, stupid. We can't arrest you yet, not without more evidence, Detective Martinez continued. But we're getting a warrant to search your property, and we're going to find what we need. You want my advice? Lawyer up, come clean, take a plea deal before this gets worse. The DA's office is not happy about this. Gas line tampering is serious business. They left after that, but the message was clear. They knew I did it. They just needed enough evidence to make it stick in court. I sat on my couch for an hour after they left, just staring at the wall. Max eventually came and put his head on my lap, and I scratched his ears mechanically. I was going to prison. There was no way around it now. I'd committed a serious felony, nearly caused an explosion, and left enough evidence that the police had tracked me down in less than a week. My career was over. My house would be foreclosed on. Everything was falling apart because I'd let anger control me for one stupid night. Tuesday morning, my doorbell rang again at 7 a.m. This time, it was a whole team. Detective Martinez, Officer Stevens, and 2 other uniformed officers. They had a warrant. We're here to execute a search of your property, Detective Martinez said, handing me paperwork. Please step outside while we work. I stood in my driveway for 2 hours while they went through my house. Neighbors gathered to watch, whispering to each other. I saw curtains moving in windows up and down the street. My humiliation was public now. They found my toolbox. They found my black clothes from that night. They found everything. When they finished, Detective Martinez approached me. Quincy Morrison, you're under arrest for felony vandalism, reckless endangerment, and criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent. The Miranda rights sounded surreal, like something from a TV show. This couldn't be happening to me, but it was. The handcuffs were cold and tight on my wrists. Officer Stevens put his hand on my head to guide me into the back of the police car, just like in the movies. As they drove me away, I saw Patricia Hastings standing on the sidewalk with another HOA board member, both watching with satisfaction on their faces. The county jail was exactly as depressing as you'd imagine. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, the smell of industrial cleaner and desperation. They processed me, took my fingerprints, put me in a cell with a guy who was sleeping off something on the lower bunk. My phone call went to Jake. "Hey man, I'm in jail," I said when he answered. "I need a lawyer." What happened?" I gave him the short version. He was silent for a long moment. "Jesus, Quincy, what were you thinking?" I wasn't, that's the problem. "Okay, I'll make some calls. Just sit tight." I sat tight in that cell for 3 days before Sarah Chen, the HOA lawyer I talked to, came to see me. She'd taken my case somehow, even though I couldn't pay her retainer. "Your friend Jake called me," she explained through the glass partition in the visiting room. "He paid the retainer, said you'd work something out later." I almost started crying. I don't deserve friends like that. "Probably not, but you've got one anyway. Let's talk about your case." We talked for an hour. The situation was bad. Felony vandalism carries 1 to 5 years in Oregon. Reckless endangerment adds more time. Criminal mischief is a minor charge in comparison. If convicted on all counts, I could be looking at 7 to 10 years. But, Sarah said, there's a path forward. The DA wants to make an example of you because it could have been catastrophic. However, you're a first-time offender, you have a clean record, and you didn't actually hurt anyone. If we can show remorse, restitution, and cooperation, we might get a plea deal. Maybe 2 to 3 years with possibility of early parole. 2 to 3 years in prison. It's better than 10, Quincy, and I might be able to get house arrest instead of prison time if we play this right. What do I have to do? First, we need to document everything the HOA did to you. Every fine, every interaction, every unreasonable demand. We're not excusing what you did, but we can show the jury or the DA that you were pushed to a breaking point by systematic harassment. Will that work? Maybe. No guarantees, but it's the best shot we have. The bail hearing was set for Friday. Sarah argued that I wasn't a flight risk, that I had roots in the community, that I was cooperative with the investigation. The DA argued that I'd committed a violent crime that endangered lives and should be held without bail. The judge set bail at $50,000. Jake and my parents pooled their money to cover the bond. I walked out of jail on Friday afternoon, 6 days after my arrest, tagged with an ankle monitor and strict orders not to leave the county. Max nearly lost his mind when I walked in the door. I sat on the floor and let him lick my face while I cried. I put him through hell. I'd put everyone through hell, and for what? Anger, pride. Neither was worth this. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings. Sarah was brilliant. She built a case showing the HOA's harassment, the unreasonable fines, the health risks they'd forced on residents. She deposed Patricia Hastings, who came across as cold and unsympathetic on the stand. She brought in expert witnesses about gas heating safety and HOA overreach. The DA offered a plea deal, 3 years in prison, reduced to 2 with good behavior. I didn't want to take it. Prison terrified me. But Sarah explained that if we went to trial and lost, I could get 10 years. The risk was too high. We had one ace left to play. Sarah had continued investigating the HOA, and she'd found something interesting. The Pinebrook Commons HOA had been embezzling residents' fees. Patricia Hastings and 2 other board members had been skimming money for years, using the account for personal expenses disguised as community needs. The environmental initiatives they'd been pushing, including the harsh heating restrictions, were designed to cut costs and hide the missing money. Sarah brought this to the DA's attention. The DA brought in the FBI because embezzlement of this scale involved wire fraud and crossed state lines when Patricia had transferred money to a second account in Washington. Suddenly, the case got complicated. The DA called a meeting with all parties. We sat in a conference room, me, Sarah, the DA, Detective Martinez, and representatives from the FBI. Here's where we are, the DA said. We've got enough to prosecute Mr. Morrison for his crimes. We've also got enough to prosecute Patricia Hastings and 2 other HOA board members for embezzlement, wire fraud, and racketeering. The question is how we want to play this. What are you proposing? Sarah asked. Mr. Morrison cooperates fully with the investigation into the HOA. He provides testimony, documents, everything we need. In exchange, we reduce his charges to misdemeanor vandalism and reckless endangerment. 1 year house arrest, 5 years probation, community service, restitution for damages. I looked at Sarah. She nodded slightly. I'll do it, I said. Over the next 3 months, I helped build the case against Patricia Hastings, Gerald Murphy, and Susan Chen. The 3 board members who'd been embezzling. I provided my fine notices, my correspondence, everything that showed their pattern of aggressive enforcement designed to extract money from residents. The FBI traced nearly $400,000 in missing HOA fees over 6 years. Patricia had used the money for a vacation home in Bend. Gerald had paid off gambling debts. Susan had been funding her adult son's failed business ventures. The trial was quick. With the evidence we provided, all 3 board members pled guilty to avoid even harsher sentences. Patricia got 5 years in federal prison. Gerald got 4. Susan got 3. My sentencing came last. I stood before the judge, Sarah beside me, and took responsibility for everything I'd done. "Your Honor, what I did was wrong," I said when given the chance to speak. "I let anger override my judgment, and I committed a serious crime that could have hurt innocent people. I'm grateful no one was harmed, but that doesn't excuse my actions. I understand that I need to face consequences, and I accept whatever sentence you deem appropriate." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Robertson, looked at me over her glasses. "Mr. Morrison, what you did was indeed serious. However, the court recognizes that you were subjected to unreasonable treatment by your HOA, treatment that we now know was criminal in nature. The court also recognizes your cooperation in bringing those criminals to justice, your lack of prior record, and your genuine remorse. You'll serve 1 year house arrest, 5 years probation, 200 hours community service, and pay $30,000 in restitution for the damages to the community center." It was more than fair. I almost cried with relief. The house arrest year was difficult but manageable. I worked from home, which my accounting firm allowed since I'd been honest with them about the situation. They put me on a performance plan, but they didn't fire me. Max was thrilled to have me home all day. I completed my community service hours on weekends, cleaning up parks and helping at homeless shelters. The ankle monitor came off exactly 1 year later. I stood in the probation office and watched the officer remove it, feeling a weight lift that went beyond the physical device. "Stay out of trouble," he said. "I plan to," I replied. The HOA lawsuit came after everything else settled. Once Patricia and her cronies were convicted, dozens of Pinebrook Commons residents filed a class action lawsuit against them personally for the embezzlement. The HOA itself dissolved, unable to function after losing its entire board to federal prison sentences. The lawsuit recovered some of the stolen money, which was distributed to residents who'd paid fees during the embezzlement period. I got back about $3,000. It felt like winning the lottery. Without an HOA, the neighborhood changed. Some people worried about property values dropping without enforcement of appearance standards. Others were relieved to finally have freedom to paint their houses whatever color they wanted or keep their Christmas lights up past January. I kept my house modest and well-maintained, but I painted the front door a bright red that would have gotten me fined under the old regime. It felt like freedom. Jake came over one Saturday in late autumn, nearly 2 years after the whole nightmare began, to help me fix a section of fence. We worked in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "You know, I never asked. Do you regret it?" "Every day," I said honestly. "What I did was stupid and dangerous. I could have killed someone. But the HOA is gone now. Patricia is in prison. Everyone found out about the embezzlement because of what happened. That doesn't make what I did right, Jake. 2 wrongs don't make a right, you know. I got lucky that things worked out this way. I could have easily ended up in prison for 10 years while those crooks kept stealing. The ends don't justify the means." He nodded. "Fair enough. You learned something at least." "Yeah. I learned that anger is poison." It makes you do things you'd never do otherwise, and once you've done them, you can't take them back. I'm still paying for one angry night 3 years from now when my probation ends. Max came running up with a stick, dropping it at my feet hopefully. I threw it for him, watching him race across the yard with boundless joy. You've got a good life now, though, Jake observed. Job, house, dog. No crazy HOA fining you for heating in winter. It is pretty good, I admitted. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful I didn't hurt anyone. I'm grateful I had friends and family who supported me through this. And I'm grateful I learned this lesson before I did something even worse. We finished the fence as the sun set, then sat on my back deck with beers. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Lights came on in windows as families settled in for the evening. Someone was grilling somewhere nearby, the smell of charcoal and cooking meat drifting on the air. You going to stay here? Jake asked. After everything, I thought about it. Yeah, I think so. Running away doesn't fix anything. Besides, most of the neighbors have been pretty supportive. We're building something better here without the HOA breathing down our necks. Just don't cut any more gas lines. Not funny, I said, but I was smiling slightly. Little bit funny. My probation officer, a patient man named Dennis who I met with monthly, told me during one of our sessions that most people who commit crimes while angry have a moment they can point to where everything went wrong. What's yours? He asked. When I opened that first violation notice, I said. That was the moment I should have immediately called a lawyer, filed a complaint, done things the right way. Instead, I let the anger build until it exploded. That first moment of choosing anger over reason, that's where I went wrong. Good insight, Dennis said. Hang on to that. I have hung on to it. Every time I feel anger rising now, every time someone cuts me off in traffic or a client yells at me over a tax return or something goes wrong, I stop and breathe and remind myself of that cold morning when I cracked a gas line and nearly destroyed my life. Anger is a choice, I've learned. You can't control feeling it, but you can control what you do with it. The neighborhood held a vote a year after the HOA dissolved about whether to form a new one. The vote failed overwhelmingly. People had learned what happens when you give a small group too much power over others' lives. Instead, we formed a voluntary neighborhood association that handles community events and shared concerns, but has no enforcement power and no ability to fine residents. Patricia Hastings got out of federal prison after serving 3 years. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to somewhere in California, far from Oregon and her crimes. I hope she learned something from her time inside, but I'm not optimistic. Some people never learn. Gerald Murphy died in prison from a heart attack. Susan Chen wrote me a letter from prison apologizing for her role in everything. I didn't respond. I'm not sure what I would have said. My parents came to visit me last Christmas, their first trip since the trial concluded. We had dinner at my house. I'd become a decent cook during house arrest, since I had nothing but time, and they told me how proud they were that I'd handled everything with grace after the initial mistake. You made a terrible choice, my mother said, but you owned it, you faced the consequences, and you've become a better person because of it. That takes courage. I'm just trying to do better, I told her. That's all any of us can do, my father said. Max has gotten older now, gray around his muzzle, but he's still the best dog a guy could ask for. He never judged me for my mistakes. He just loved me through everything, wagging his tail when I came home from court dates and curling up next to me when the anxiety got bad. I'm dating someone now, a woman named Rachel I met at a community service event. She knows everything about my past. I was upfront from the beginning because I'd learned that honesty matters. She didn't run away. We've been seeing each other for 6 months, taking things slow, building something real on a foundation of truth. My house is warm in winter now. I keep the thermostat at a comfortable 68 degrees and don't think twice about it. It's a small freedom, but it means everything to someone who almost lost it all. The community center was eventually sold to a private company that turned it into a gym. It's open to the public now, not just residents, and they keep it at a reasonable temperature. I go there sometimes to work out, walking past the spot where I committed my crime, reminding myself of how far I've come and how much further I have to go. 3 years of probation left. I mark off each month on a calendar in my kitchen, counting down to freedom. But I'm already free in the ways that matter. Free from anger, free from the poor decisions it causes, free from the HOA that tried to control every aspect of our lives. I run into former neighbors sometimes at the grocery store or coffee shop. Most are friendly. A few still blame me for the dissolution of the HOA, believing that property values have suffered without it. I understand their perspective even if I disagree. Everyone has their own journey to make, their own lessons to learn. Last week, I drove past Patricia Hastings' old house. A young family lives there now, with kids who play in the yard and a dog who barks at squirrels. The house looks happy in a way it never did when Patricia lived there. Life moves on with or without us. I've thought a lot about writing down my story, sharing it somehow as a cautionary tale. Maybe someone else out there is sitting in their cold house, getting unreasonable fines from an HOA, feeling that same anger build. Maybe they need to hear that the anger isn't worth it, that there are legal ways to fight injustice, that one bad decision can haunt you for years. So I'm writing this. I'm putting it all down honestly, not sugarcoating my mistakes, not pretending I was justified. I was wrong. What I did was criminal and dangerous. The fact that good eventually came from it, the HOA's crimes being discovered, Patricia and her cronies going to prison, doesn't excuse my actions. But I survived it. I'm rebuilding my life piece by piece. I'm becoming the person I should have been all along, someone who faces problems head-on with patience and legal channels, not anger and criminal activity. Jake tells me I'm being too hard on myself. Rachel says I've more than paid my debt to society. Dennis, my probation officer, says my attitude and progress are exemplary. Maybe they're all right. But I carry the weight of what I did as a reminder, a touchstone to keep me grounded when things get difficult. Max just brought me his leash. It's a beautiful Saturday morning and he wants his walk. The neighborhood is peaceful. The sun is shining. My probation meeting isn't until Tuesday. Work is going well. Rachel is coming over for dinner tonight. Life, despite everything, is good. Not perfect, but good. And good is more than I deserve after what I did. I clip the leash to Max's collar and we head out the door. The air is cool but comfortable. Spring is coming. My thermostat is set to a comfortable temperature. There are no orange envelopes on my door. I'm not proud of what I did to the community center's gas line. I never will be, but I'm proud of who I've become after facing the consequences. I'm proud that I learned, that I grew, that I'm using my experience to be better. That's the real story, I think. Not the crime, not the HOA's corruption, not even the legal battle. The real story is about a person who made a terrible mistake and found a way to become better because of it, and that's a story worth telling.